Welcome everyone to the January 12th, 2023 meeting of the Interneighborhood Cooperation Transportation Committee. This is a committee of interneighborhood cooperation, and interneighborhood cooperation is an association of neighborhood associations in Denver. We have topic-specific committees, and this one, transportation, we try to bring several topics every time we meet that are timely, up to date, and bring information to you, whether you represent an RNO or just live in a neighborhood and you want to be involved in current transportation topics. We're hoping this will be a jumping off point for finding the topics that you want to engage with, take back home, get other people engaged with, and especially hear about things early. We have lots of great things tonight. This is the order of the agenda on the screen. This is rearranged slightly from what the announcement was. First, we'll hear from Denver Streets Partnership about their fantastic 2022 and what's coming up in 2023. Bryan Wilson is going to talk about his effort to ensure snow clearance on routes to schools. Two neighborhood associations have asked to speak on their petition to pause the I-25 and Broadway interchange. And then we have two very timely topics from the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and one co-presented with the Community Planning and Development Department, outdoor places and shared streets, both of which in different ways are taking what we learned from things we did during the pandemic and make them a regular part of Denver. We'll start tonight with Denver Streets Partnership. We have Molly McKinley. She is the policy manager, and Sam McCrory, the Open Streets Program Manager for Denver Streets Partnership. I will stop sharing, and Molly, you can take it away. Molly and Sam.
And Joel, would you mind making Sam a co-host as well? We weren't able to marry our presentations together, so we'll need to do a quick little switch.
It is done.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi, everyone. Let's see. Thanks, Joel, for having us tonight. I'm Molly McKinley. I'm the policy director for the Denver Streets Partnership. I'm going to run through our year of 2022 in review. Lots of slides, going to go through them pretty quickly because we had a really eventful year last year. Excited to share that with you and also talk about what's up in 2023. So I'll start with our policy work here. Obviously, Denver Deserves Sidewalks was kind of our biggest win of the year for sure. In 9 months, we convened a campaign committee, developed an ordinance, got 20,000 signatures to qualify for the ballot, and reached over 120,000 voters during our Get Out the Vote campaign. We received all of these endorsements from some of the organizations you represent, INC, and lots of other organizations in the community, which ultimately led us to victory. So we are, of course, very psyched about that and certainly going to be talking about that for years to come. We also, one of my other kind of top victories of last year was working together with a bunch of community partners to ask CDOT, DRCOG, and Denver not to expand I-25 in central Denver. We also worked with some partners to recommend projects to those agencies about what they should be spending this new transportation funding on. We hosted a rally in Sun Valley with community members calling on CDOT, DRCOG, and Denver not to expand I-25. And then we win. CDOT said they're not moving forward with an expansion of I-25 in central Denver, and some funding got moved from highway projects to transit, some bus rapid transit funding, which was a really exciting, great victory, kind of exactly what we were asking for. Really, really excited to continue to build on that momentum. I don't know if any of you saw the New York Times article a couple weeks ago, maybe it was last week. Someone's off mute. Okay. There was a New York Times article just a week or two ago, and I had some friends texting it to me about, should we really be expanding highways in our communities anymore? And it was really cool to see that as part of the narrative. And I'm excited that this idea is no longer really a fringe idea in our world anymore. We also launched a new coalition with some of our partner organizations called the Alliance to Transform Transportation, which really builds on that momentum of stopping wasteful highway spending and increasing funding for public transit. We lobbied for the bill that funded Fare Free August for RTD this year. And we launched a program, a community outreach program to go with that called Transit Champs. We had 48 events over the course of a year, or over the course of the month, I'm sorry, and connected with over 200 riders. We got out cheering on transit, got out in the community a bunch, and also did lots of ride-alongs on different transit routes with, here we rode with Deborah Johnson, the CEO and general manager of RTD, but also got out with a lot of other elected officials. We had a bunch of other things related to public transit, engaging in all of these processes that are happening, including Reimagine RTD, RTD's Fare and Pass study, all kinds of things that I won't dig into, but really heavy on the public transit work. Late last year, in late September, we launched our policy platform for the 2023 municipal election that we developed in collaboration with our partner organizations. We did a briefing and sent this to all the candidates who had declared they were running at that point. And now we send it to every candidate who shows up on the spreadsheet for declaring for running for mayor or city council, which has resulted in a lot of emails coming out of my inbox, but excited that so many people are running. We also hosted a Vision Zero Ride and Walk of Silence. We put out a new call to action related to Vision Zero, really heavily focused on public transit as kind of the way that we should be really reaching zero traffic fatalities. We also spent some time analyzing the budget and asking for some funding for Vision Zero projects. We hosted, in partnership with the Denver Bicycle Lobby, the Marion Street Parkway Bikeway opening. We hosted the Streets for People Summit with our partners at the Denver Community Active Living Coalition and had some really tough conversations about public space, public transit, people who are facing homelessness, folks who are using drugs, a lot of topics that have been kind of floating around in our public realm this year and have been in the media, and we really were able to have a community conversation about them at the summit that we hosted. I believe that was in June. We also did a bunch of neighborhood project work last year, including our 10-year anniversary Better Block Jefferson Park celebration, where we honored some community members and leaders and had a really great time, as you can see by the bubbles and the hammocks. We worked with some of our community partners on, reimagining the Colfax Viaduct and what that could look like in the future. We hosted a really fun Bike from Work Day celebration this year and movie night. A 14th Avenue Open Streets demonstration, parking day, did a bunch of public art, and even more public art. We hosted the Sun Valley Night Markets. We worked with our partners at Community Active Living Coalition on delivering some micro grants. I think several of you, who joined the call have gotten some of these micro grants, and so really excited about all the work that y'all have been doing. And then I'll drop the link to this video in the chat, but we also hosted several night markets and community events this year as part of our West Denver Rising initiative. This video is really great, and if we had the time, I would show it right now, but you should watch it when you have the chance. Oh no, I'm starting it. Hang on. Let's see. So that's all we did last year. That's why everyone at Denver Streets Partnership looks so tired at the end of the year. But we're really excited about 2023 and building on all that momentum. A big focus for us in the next 6 months, especially, is the 2023 municipal election in Denver. Such a critical election with the opportunity for a new mayor in Denver and many open city council seats. We're definitely going to be doing a lot of candidate education in the next couple of weeks, months, as well as making sure that voters like you have the tools and access to resources that can provide you with some good nonpartisan information for making decisions as you get your ballot. We'll also be following up on the implementation of Denver Deserves sidewalks. Our work is not done on sidewalks, maybe much to some of our dismay. It just doesn't, sidewalks won't disappear from our vocabulary, that's for sure. We'll be again continuing to focus on Vision Zero. 2022 was a really not quite a record-breaking year for traffic fatalities in Denver, but was still really trending in the wrong direction as far as where we need to be going. So that's going to be a focus for us. We'll continue a lot of our public transit work, advocating for more funding, policies that make it easier and more convenient for folks to use transit in our city. and any opportunities to be stopping highway expansion and wasteful highway spending. So thinking about the proposal to expand I-270 north of Denver. And then we're also working on some state level land use proposals with a bunch of organizational partners that you'll probably see during the legislative session. So if you're interested in getting involved in any of that, you should sign up for our e-news, which comes out every other week. We also send out other action alerts throughout the month. So that's really the best way to stay up to date with what we're working on. You can also follow us on Twitter at Bike Walk Bus. And now I will turn it to Sam. I'll stop sharing my screen. Sam can share his screen.
Awesome. Thanks, Molly. Great presentation. A little bummed you didn't use the photo of me skateboarding on parking day, but I will. That's okay. Some of the good things we're also looking at this year. What was that? Sorry.
I was just making sure everyone knows that you were cool on skateboarding on parking day.
Cool. And so one of the things that we're looking forward to in 2023 that the Denver Streets Partnership is a part of through the Downtown Denver Partnership is what we're calling Viva Streets Denver, which is an open streets program that we are kind of revitalizing. If you're familiar, a couple of years ago, they did another program called Viva Streets, but this one is going to be a different location and it's going to be bigger and better. So if you're familiar with like what open streets and what Ciclavia is, it's basically a kind of shutting down streets, getting people together, supporting local businesses, but also mainly encouraging a healthy and car-free lifestyle. And so this is kind of the vision that the Downtown Denver Partnership brought about this year and why they wanted to bring Viva Streets back to Denver to do all these things and explore our neighborhoods. And you'll see further on as I have a map that kind of shows all the neighborhoods that our route touches this year. But these are kind of our four main goals and our vision for Viva Streets. And here's some of the basics. Again, like I said, this is going to be a car-free route. So people are free to come. They can walk, they can roll, they can use their bike, they can just hang out, they can skateboard. They can do basically anything they want along the Broadway corridor and the Welton corridor, specifically from Alameda all the way up to Downing. We have 4 dates set in stone: the 14th, June 4th, July 9th, and August 6th. The May 14th is a really important date for us. That is when the NACDO workshop, if those who aren't familiar with NACDO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, it's a big national conference that's coming to Denver this year. And we're really excited to have that. And also Mother's Day is on May 14th this year. So we're really excited to kick it off on May 14th and those 4 other days. Those are all on Sundays and everything will take place from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we're expecting 15 to 25,000 people each event. So this is really good. And we're trying to make this really fantastic and really great each Sunday in the months of May, June, July, and August. So here's kind of the meat and potatoes of this presentations of this route. This is what it will look like. As I mentioned, it doesn't start really anywhere, but the northern and southern terminus of the route are at Alameda and at Downing. And you can kind of see just how many neighborhoods we touch with the open streets route. So if we're moving our way north, you'll see there are little boxes and kind of stars and stuff like that. And, this is not just going to be walking and rolling, but a chance to do some programming and some activities along the route as well. So we have 3 main, what we're calling activity hubs, and 2 other areas where there's going to be additional programming. So we're looking for the activity hubs at preferably First and Broadway, kind of near, if you're familiar where Punch Bowl Social is and the Hornet, those restaurants. Moving our way up at kind of Zeckendorf Plaza, right at the crossing of Spear. There'll be kind of additional activity area. There's a good mountain view right there. And then further up, we're looking for a spot near Civic Center Park. We think it'd be really great to activate that space right there near the Capitol and Civic Center Park. And then another activity hub right there at Lawson Park. There's kind of a nice little area in between the library and Lawson Park that we're thinking about doing some additional activities. And then our last hub will be at 27th and Welton at 5 Points Plaza, again, using all those great businesses and getting people to come out there. So while I did say this route is car-free, unfortunately, we're not able to close all the roads. So roads like Colfax, 8th, 6th, Park 20th, and some other ones, more high traffic roads that really we were kind of forced to allow cars through. Those will be open to cars, but they will kind of be blocked off for a period of time, let people travel through. Police and volunteers will help with that traffic control there. And so those will be basically like the light signalization, 2 to 2 minutes, letting cars through, and then people will go through on their bikes and walking and whatever they'll be doing. So So the purpose of me being here today is, we want to get as many people involved with Viva Streets as possible, whether it's through community outreach and involvement or volunteer opportunities. So I'll put my email and Ellen Forthofer's email, who is the Downtown Denver Partnership. She's our project manager for this. Our emails are on the next slide. Feel free to email us anything if you want to get involved. If you know a local business, a neighborhood group, or another organization who's doing great work, who wants to be a part of Viva Streets, whether as a sponsor or doing programming or anything, we're at the very early stages of this. And so we want to make sure everyone is involved. But also if you're just interested in being a volunteer, we're anticipating a lot of volunteers for this project. And so there's going to be a larger public brand launch in February. So you'll see a lot of great information on our website, which is vivastreetsdenver.com. And so feel free to reach out to any of us. There's our emails right there. I'll also pop them in the chat after this presentation. And then the last thing I'll also say is, we're anticipating a larger brand launch in February. So we're doing a lot of these smaller meetings, and we just kind of ask people to kind of keep this to your chest and, talk internally with your groups and your and people you may know about this. We don't want to have this project hit anybody cold. So feel free to spread the word out when that public brand launch happens in February, but we're excited to share this information today. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or send me an email.
Thank you. Thank you both. We are working with the INC board to see if we can get this a presentation about Viva Streets on the February agenda. Thank you to Jill for proposing that. We now have time for questions to either of our speakers from Denver Streets Partnership. And I'll start with one, Sam or Molly. Could you just give us an overview for those who aren't familiar with Denver Streets Partnership? Because it's sort of two things that wonderfully blend together. One is an actually staffed, resourced entity, but also it's a coalition. And how does that work? And how can people be involved?
Good question. So folks, you can be involved with our organization as an individual. So lots of grassroots actions, either related to advocacy or related to our more like program tactical work. So Sam and I our work doesn't overlap too much. Our work is definitely moving together towards a common goal. But I'm very much focused on the grassroots advocacy, grass tops advocacy work, where we're really trying to put pressure on decision makers to do the things that we think make the world better. And Sam and many of the other folks on our team do a lot of the more on the ground community projects-based work. So sort of like the first half of my presentation versus the second half is kind of how our work is divided. So there's really an opportunity for almost anyone, depending on what your skills and interests are, to get involved with the organization. But like Joel mentioned, we're also a coalition of organizations. So I see representatives of lots of different groups on this call who are a part of our coalition. But if you are a representative of an organization and you'd like to get involved with our work, please be in touch. We're always looking to expand our table and the partners that we're working with.
Fantastic. John Rickey has a question. John?
All right, let's see if can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hey, my question is, I saw in your 2023 plans, I didn't see anything relating to parking, or car parking, which seems to be an impediment to getting anything done, be it with land use or be it with safer streets or be it with just trying to make it safe for people to walk. Do you have any plans moving towards parking reform?
Yeah, thanks for asking, John. I will say that list is not a comprehensive list of all the policy topics we'll be working on in 2023. One thing that I'd left off that list when I was talking about the 2023 municipal election is that, we'll be working to get candidates educated and voters educated ahead of the election. But then when the new mayor and city council are being sworn in, we're working on developing right now an agenda for the first, we're kind of trying to decide, is it 6 months, is it a year, what's the timeline? But the things that we'd like to see happen in the first however many months of the new administration, really think that that's something. Some types of parking proposals could be part of that agenda. It's also something that we can work on through the Sustainable Transportation subcommittee of the Sustainability Advisory Committee that I'm serving on. That's part of the group that's overseeing the spending of the climate tax dollars. So that's a policy that there are some parking policies proposed in the Climate Action Task Force in their list of recommendations that came out when they were doing that process back in 2020. So there are a lot of opportunities, and it's certainly something that's on our radar.
Great. Thanks to folks for proposing questions in the chat. I know some of them are being answered there, but for the sake of the recording, for people who will be watching this later, I'll call on a couple folks. Nathan Harvey had a question about street design.
Yeah, thank you. You know, kind of the short-term solution is what I was focusing on. Obviously, things like transit are long-term solutions for solving the problems that exist on arterials, you know, Federal, Sheridan. But I was kind of curious on the short-term solutions that we're pursuing, just, you know, basic traffic calming, roundabouts, things like that. So that was my question.
Yeah, Nathan, you know, those are things that we've been advocates for and will continue to advocate for. But at this point, we know that the city's done a lot of those really small, quick, low-cost solutions, and they're good, but that can't be where the buck stops. We really need some big transformational changes. And we're excited for new city leadership that can hopefully be inspired to take action on that level, especially considering the amount of traffic fatalities we've seen since the city committed to Vision Zero.
Yeah, could you, Bruce Bescat asked about Vision Zero. Can you tell us a little bit about what's next? I mean, interventions are being done and deaths are rising. What's next in 2023? You had a bullet point about Vision Zero, but what can we all rally behind to get this done?
Yeah, so right now we're working on some Canada education related to Vision Zero, making sure that folks who are running know that the city committed to that. And, you know, we're going to be doing some work to be asking them to publicly share what their commitment looks like and how they're going to change things, because this commitment, in air quotes, really hasn't been working. So what are they going to be doing? What can we be holding them accountable to when they are elected? And then really working with the new department head at the Department of Transportation, once that person's appointed, the mayor, new city council members, to really make sure that they understand the gravity of this issue and be putting forward, you know, we know the policy proposals, we've been proposing things for years that the city should be doing to really meet the moment. And a lot of them haven't been done. So we're kind of at the ready with a bunch of solutions, and we're just excited for some new folks to be able to actually work with.
Fantastic. We'll end with June. The land use and transportation are tightly linked, and June's interested. June, why don't you unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, definitely. So I saw some language in the presentation about state level land use reform. I know that's a very, very large topic. All the different municipalities and home rule areas and counties and everything all have different land use policies. And currently we're at the very beginning of the legislative session. So is DSP interfacing with any lawmakers? Are there any details like I've shared about that at this time? I do know like the next month is basically when we got to get policies written and sent in. So, you know, what does the movement look like on that?
Yeah, great question. So we have a pretty good relationship with most of the electeds in Denver, and we're currently working with a coalition that will be launched more publicly probably next week, with some policy proposals that have been being cooked up. There's something like 50, 60 different organizations that are working together from across the state to come up with some land use and housing reform policies that we'll be bringing to the governor. The governor's very interested in some land use reform this year. He's made a lot of comments in the media about that. A lot of legislators who are interested in working on this. So confident that some policy changes will be seen at the state level related to land use and housing. There isn't a ton of money in the state budget this year, so a lot of them will be more on the policy side rather than from the funding side, but could potentially set up funding opportunities for future years or through new mechanisms.
Very happy to hear that.
Basically, stay tuned for more details.
Well, thank you very much. Please look in the chat for all the contact information that was previously on the screen about how to get a hold of Denver Streets Partnership in general and these specific contacts. Looking forward to learning more about Viva Streets. That's going to be a huge event. When we were talking about that on the INC Executive Committee the other day, we had several people who remembered earlier events, you know, sort of early prototype events. I remembered back when Carla Madison was in office, there was a very, very small but interesting neighborhood level event. And then there was another one, and it's getting really real. And it's not at all surprising that both Denver Streets Partnership and Downtown Denver Partnership in the middle of making it happen. So thank you. We're now going to turn to a brief topic. We had a request from Bryan Wilson to talk about some of his advocacy in snow clearance near schools. And if you didn't catch it in the meeting announcement, Bryan was recently featured on TV for actually, putting his muscles where his mouth is and, clearing some of these dangerous patches on streets and on curb ramps. So Bryan, you've got some pretty clear ideas of what we can do better. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joel. Real quick, I'd like to give everybody some background about me. I was a teacher once upon a time, and specifically in Denver. I was living in Centennial while teaching in Commerce City at Adams City High School. So commuting the whole north-south distance of Denver, that was in 2013. And I was carpooling, so I was seeing as a passenger in the car, just the disasters with bus stops, sidewalks, especially in the winter, and students just waiting for a bus for who knows how long. Fast forward to now, I live in Congress Park. We have an elementary school in the district or in the neighborhood and a high school just on the other side of Colfax. Our middle school is a little bit further away. As a cyclist, I see these students on a daily basis trying to navigate to school, especially in the wintertime. One student in particular always has a watermelon helmet on. I'm pretty sure it's a nutcase helmet. And he's the only one that I'm pretty sure regularly bikes to Maury Middle School. I see a number of students and families walking, struggling, slipping on the streets, sidewalks, trying to get to school. And what I'm kind of asking all of you to do right now is just think in your neighborhood where you live, how do you get from your house with whether you have children or not, how would those children make it to school? And that's kind of where this came to be. In my neighborhood, 12th Avenue is a bus route, and it's a route that a lot of students walk to school. So just globally speaking, the idea is if we can make sidewalks and crosswalks more accessible, especially along the bus routes that touch schools, we'll do two things. We'll make the bus stops more accessible. We'll also make the schools more accessible. And the reason I bring up bus stops is because students going from Congress Park to Maury Middle School in particular would get on the RTD 10 route, which goes down 12th, and get off at one or two bus stops. This last week, both bus stops were covered in ice. They should be cleared by the apartment managers. Neat, because then crossing from those bus stops, the crosswalks were ice anyway. And then once you get up to the sidewalk on Emerson, that was also a sheet of ice. So that's kind of like the, we have a problem here sort of deal. So the idea is, what if we can identify in advance certain like streets or routes, whatever you want to call them, that are sort of, almost think of them as like in the traffic engineering idea, like collectors. We'll think of it as like pedestrian collectors. So for Teller Elementary School, that could be 12th and Garfield. So even though you might live one block over, but 3 blocks down, take that first block laterally right to Garfield, and then maybe Garfield has all the crosswalks cleared. So I'm not suggesting we clear every single crosswalk in the city of Denver as volunteers. I think that's impossible. What I do think is possible is for us to identify a subset of routes, get volunteers to make sure that those are clear, ideally day of the snow. And then they'll be, I don't know, safe-ish, safer, at least passable than they have been in many areas. And then the only other thing I'd like to add on that a couple of us kind of thought of over the last few days is trying to lean on business improvement districts a little bit to help us with this. Because I live near a couple on Colfax in particular, and those could be a big help. Not necessarily to like clear the snow themselves, but to organize it. And if you get one, I don't know, entity clearing the snow, they'll be going along Colfax, then clear across each crosswalk instead of stopping at the corner, which I think is a problem currently. But that's the long and short of it. I've been talking to Joanna a little bit. She's heavy into the schools. She lives up on the north side and doesn't really see. I saw a question pop in, and I'm glad that I saw that. So for safe routes to schools, yes, there are safe routes to school, but those are just infrastructure builds. Those aren't necessarily snow clearing. And then there's also the Denver Snow Angels, which are for anybody that, don't quote me on this, but I think anybody over 60, or if you have a physical disability that limits your snow clearing ability, you're able to sign up and get volunteers to clear your sidewalk. But if I don't live near the end of the block, nobody's still clearing that crosswalk, so to speak. So in my mind, the crosswalks and the alley crossings are still a big problem. And then the bus stops often just get ignored by adjacent property owners. But that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Yeah, we had the one question that you saw about safe routes to school. So thanks for making the distinction on the focus. Yeah, and we have Judith is agreeing because the ramps at crosswalks are often not shoveled. I've seen that a fair bit in my neighborhood where someone shovels the sidewalk and then assumes that the ramps will take care of themselves, which is doesn't happen.
And also, Joel and Bryan, that the ramps cause the snow to back up onto them. So that even if once it's shoveled, a day later when the snow's melted a little and frozen again, it goes, do you understand? Do you know what I'm talking about? It moves up onto that ramp, and then it's impossible for a wheelchair or just a plain pedestrian to walk across that part of the sidewalk.
Yeah, you're right, Judith. I don't know, I'm very anal retentive, as maybe that's the best way I can describe it. I was hacking away at 12th and Elizabeth today. There needs to be drainage for that melt, because I think that's a big part of the problem. But also there's some education that needs to happen, because sometimes on some of these streets, especially where there is plowing, the snow gets pushed off to the sides, but then it kind of forms a mound, and that creates those ice dams. There is something called an ice blading request, and that's often very helpful. You can contact 311 or PocketGov. I talked to a couple of local businesses in my neighborhood, and one of the business owners had no knowledge of this concept and was just putting a cone out where there's ice in front of their business to kind of like let drivers know that there's a significant hazard there. So I had a brief conversation with her, let her know that the ice blade is, yes, the ice blading is for the street. It's a giant grader. I grew up in the country, so I'm familiar with giant machinery, but it's like this big, almost like tractor with a blade underneath it. And there's evidence that it went along. I didn't see it go down Colfax, but it'll go through like thick chunks of ice to break it up to allow the water to drain. So there's a lot to be done, obviously, but I think what we can do is focus on those neighborhood crosswalks that aren't near anything. They're just a neighborhood crosswalk that gets icy, and then maybe we can get a couple volunteers to just hit it real quick, and then it'll be safe for ideally up until the next snow.
So we were emailing back and forth, and Bryan suggested that the INC Transportation Committee recommend to INC sending out encouragement to RNOs, and there were sort of 3 points. One, to ask RNOs to connect with their local schools about the safe routes snow-wise that are needed. 2, for the RNOs to use their methods, could be social media, email, whatever they use in their neighborhood, to recruit volunteers to clear the routes, including intersections along the areas that were identified as really key for students. And then 3rd, to ask RNOs to coordinate with Bryan. He's volunteered to be a central coordinating point to maintain a map as this evolves, what neighborhoods are active and committed to this, and what are the routes that they've kind of picked out. Does that cover it, Bryan?
I think you nailed it.
Okay. So this isn't likely to be, a motion that INC would need to debate and bring back multiple months and vote on, so much as a recommendation from this committee to INC to send out this encouragement, to send out this this idea. And so we'll be following up on that. Thank you very much, Bryan.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to move to our 3rd topic on the agenda. And this is also something that's coming to us from the neighborhoods. In this case, we have 2 neighborhood organizations, and let me get this right here. We have Amy Kenreich from the West Wash Park Neighborhood Association, and we have Brittany Spinner from the Lincoln Street Community RNO, and they're going to talk to us about their petition regarding the I-25 and Broadway Interchange project. Amy, I've made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that introduction, Joel. I won't reintroduce myself, but I will share my screen, and I'm going to try to do what Brittany told me, which is, hold on a second.
Looks great.
It does look good to you, but hold on a second. I want to share the share it in presentation mode. Just a second. Share screen. There we go. And now I want to do presenter view. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, we are seeing the tabs across the top, but it looks fine.
Okay, great. I'm going to let Brittany start then.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Joel. So for nearly 70 years, Lincoln Street was a quiet tree-lined residential street. And throughout the decades, Lincoln Street and Broadway have suffered from several forced infrastructure projects that have transformed both streets into the highway-style infrastructure that you know today. Most projects were completed without residents' input and came as a surprise to residents. It began in the 1950s when Lincoln was first converted to a one-way couplet with Broadway overnight. In 1955, the I-25 and Lincoln northbound off-ramp was added onto Lincoln and Sherman. In 1964, a new I-25 Lincoln on and off ramp was added, which demolished a block and a half of homes on Lincoln and separated the current 800 block of South Lincoln from its neighborhood. Then in 1971, again, without the neighborhood's input, Lincoln Street's tree lawns were removed, and it was expanded from 2 to 4 lanes to become an arterial meant to move out of town commuters quickly through Denver. Today, Lincoln has rightfully earned its place in Vision Zero's high injury network due to the high speeds and crashes. Similar forced infrastructure projects happened on Broadway as well, and over the decades, it has diminished the powerful multimodal transit corridor that it once was. In 1999, studies began for the redesign of the I-25 interchange at Lincoln and Broadway in Ohio, when the city started to plan a new transit-oriented development at the site of the Gates Rubber Factory, now known as Broadway Station. The project aims to boost this area of South Broadway and create a new center of Denver, much like Union Station. The project's main focus was to become a major hub of multimodal transit connections due to its adjacency to RTD's Broadway Station. Around 2006, planning and designs were developed for the interchange, and a NEPA report was triggered. Originally, the plans for the Valley Highway expansion showed a sincere effort to reconnect the 800 South Lincoln block back to the neighborhood. That's the first image on the left there. And it showcased a significant focus on the bike and pedestrian infrastructure. The plan also included the demolition of the existing northbound I-25 on-ramp. The plans seem to acknowledge the importance of the 0.3-mile connection between the neighborhood and the RTD Broadway station and removed the on-ramp from being a barrier. In 2007, 2 homes were left off of the historical review of the 800 block, even though all surrounding homes were surveyed at the time. The plans drastically changed 2 years later in 2008. New plans were developed and they now heavily reflected a car-centric interchange design with very limited pedestrian safety elements. The focus on the bike paths were gone. The plans now surprisingly introduced the demolition of the 800 block of South Lincoln in order to accommodate a rebuild of the northbound on-ramp, a new flyover southbound wedge ramp over Broadway, and the demolition of the existing southbound ramp. The reasoning for the demolition of the homes was to rebuild the ramp and to increase speed upon entering the highway to allow more space for cars to queue. This is the plan that has been approved, mostly unchanged for the last 15 years. Between 2011 and 2019, the surrounding neighborhoods expressed numerous concerns about decreased safety for pedestrians, increased speed of already fast-moving traffic, cut-through traffic into the neighborhood, car-focused infrastructure, and a major lack of connectivity between RTD's Broadway station and the neighborhood. The neighborhood expressed that this intersection already divided a neighborhood once and will divide it even further by making Broadway station inaccessible. And again, the neighborhood's concerns and feedback were ignored. Finally, in 2020, the project started moving again with TIPS funding for phase 2, segment 3, with aims to start construction in Q1 of 2023, and it will encompass the area shown in this plan. The neighborhood took a renewed interest in the project and has discovered that the project itself has not followed almost any of the goals that they have listed in their own environmental assessment. More so, the TIPS funding application states that this is a first and last mile multimodal project. However, please take a look at the expected pedestrian paths, walking paths provided by DOTI in this plan and ask yourself, would I walk there to access the light rail or the parks and retail that will be adjacent to Broadway station? How would I walk there? Where are the bike paths? And how does the future Lincoln BRT get incorporated into this plan? These are just some of our concerns.
And now I'm going to take over. I'm representing the West Wash Park Neighborhood Association. So let's break it down. What's the problem? What's the big problem? Let's look at this map again that Brittany was showing with a few notes on it. So the problem that neighbors have, and when I say neighbors, I mean mainly West Wash Park Neighborhood Association, Baker Neighborhood Association, and the Lincoln Broadway Corridor Association. So our problem with this project is that to travel 1/3 of a mile from West Washington Park or Lincoln Street down to Broadway Station, you have to cross, with the new design, you'll have to cross 19 lanes of high injury network traffic. You'll have to cross 4 highway ramps to reach this RTD station that you can see from the corner of Ohio and Lincoln. We don't care for the slip lane that they're going to put in as you exit the highway onto Lincoln Street. There's going to be a signal there, and when that traffic is backed up, drivers will just be able to avoid stopping entirely and turn on that easy curve onto Ohio Avenue through the neighborhood. Pedestrians and bicyclists are going to have to share a sidewalk while drivers get brand new lanes. Pedestrians are dumped into a parking lot once they do reach RTD station. There's 2 ways to reach it, according to this map that DOTI has on their website. That's what you're looking at here. They don't have the notes, but this is their map. So pedestrians are going to get dumped into parking lots. We don't care for that. We especially don't care for the displacement of 9 households on, can you see where my mouse is? Mm-hmm. This is the on-ramp that they're going to rebuild, the northbound on-ramp. And here are the homes that are going to be demolished in favor of drivers from outside of Denver. That's who mostly uses this interchange. 60% are from outside of Denver. And we also finally don't like the zigzag route for pedestrians. It's a zigzag route because it's planned around this new interchange or this new I-25 northbound ramp. That's why the zigzag route. Okay, so let's be fair. Let's think about 2008. I would like to think that planners were doing their best. Now we know that if you add more lanes, it will bring more traffic. Here's an example of what people were thinking back in 2008 when this design was finalized. This is a transcript from a public meeting. Michael Gill, these are his words. He was representing the city of Denver. He says, by the time we get to the year 2030, our traffic model projections say that we're going to need 8 lanes of capacity to handle that 2030 volume. The consensus committee was concerned that if we built 8 lanes, it would just fill up with traffic immediately. In the future, when we need more traffic, if we need more capacity, then we take the parking lanes out and we accommodate the traffic that would be showing up at a future date. Why is this so complicated? Let me tell you, you guys, it's a full-time job, or at least a part-time job, to keep up with this project and understand what's going on. It's no wonder that highways divide neighborhoods. It's so complicated because it's a collaboration between CDOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and the City and County of Denver. The City of Denver is the project sponsor. Most of the money for this project is coming from a Denver Regional Council of Governments TIP fund. And I should note that that money is federal money. They're in charge of passing out the federal money. Here's another look at the timeline that Brittany mentioned some of these milestones. Around 2005, a transit-oriented development was proposed that touches a federal highway, so it's subject to NEPA process, Brittany mentioned. That's the National Environmental Protection Act process. That process produced an environmental assessment that's about 200 pages long. In that environmental assessment that was finalized in 2008, there's a design that they call the preferred alternative. Since 2008, phase 1 was constructed. So you might be familiar with the larger than life intersection at Mississippi and Broadway. That was part of phase 1. Phase 2 segments 1 and 2 were constructed. And then finally in 2020, the TIP funding was secured for the phase that we're in right now, the one that we're talking about now. Just a couple of notes here. In this environmental assessment, there were lots of goals. The goals don't line up with how the project is designed today. The goals like provide fully integrated and useful bicycle and pedestrian facilities, provide multimodal travel options that may not be accommodated with existing infrastructure, develop a proposed action that is consistent with recommendations from approved city plans like Blueprint Denver, fast tracks, lots of plans. And finally, another note, the Dr. Cog TIP funding application that the city sent in really sells this project as a multimodal and a first and last mile project, which it's not. Okay, what have we done about it? So Brittany said there's a renewed interest in the past couple of years as people are starting to understand that this project is actually going to happen. In February of 2021, West Wash Park Neighborhood Association, and I believe called, but basically CDOT said no, there are no historical ramifications for demolishing those homes. Those homes don't count. They're not of value historically. So we sent a letter opposing that. In April of last year, DOTI came and spoke at our annual meeting, the West Wash Park annual meeting. Needless to say, the neighborhood feedback was not positive at all. And in the spring of 2022, we had a neighborhood walking tour with 40 participants. We walked them through the project. And later in the spring, we released a neighborhood survey to collect feedback from the neighborhood. We've done all that we can, including land use and transportation committee meetings have had this as a topic. Board meetings have had it as a topic. We produce a newsletter. If you guys are seeing my video, here's an example of our newsletter. We put articles in our newsletter, print and e-newsletter. We've made social media posts. We've done all that we can to educate our neighbors and collect feedback. Luckily, this is a topic that we have consensus on. So we feel validated in this effort to ask DOTI to redesign the project to accommodate active transportation. I want to point out, no pun intended, that in 2022, there's a lot of finger pointing. We would ask DOTI, can you make some changes for us? And they'd say, oh, it's not us, it's CDOT. We'd ask CDOT, hey, are you in charge? Can you do something about this? We have some concerns. And they'd say, oh, it's not our project, it's Denver's. So back and forth, back and forth. So finally, September 1st, West Wash Park and Lincoln Broadway corridor RNOs sent letters to DOTI asking for design updates and asking for basic dignity for people outside of vehicles. At the end of December, we had not had any response to our letters after repeated requests, emails, reaching out to DOTI. They weren't responding. So we were forced to create a petition asking the city of Denver, CDOT, and the Federal Highway Administration to pause this project, reconsider the design so that it better meets the original intent of the project. What kind of media have we had? We've had four mayoral candidates tour the project. Bruff, Calderon, Tafoya, and Ortega. Tafoya wrote an article for Westward that was great, and we really appreciated that. Ortega did public comment at a DOTI advisory board meeting about this project, which was highly unusual. Also met with the mayor's office and sent the executive director, Adam Phipps, a letter asking for the same things that we were asking for. We've also seen in recent months letters to the mayor's office from the mayor's pedestrian advisory committee, from Greater Denver Transit, also from Baker's RNO, and of course from Lincoln and West Wash Park. And I listed here a few of the articles and TV channel, blanking on the word, TV spots that have aired. And today there was another one, Univision picked it up today. So we ask that you sign our petition, which is, there's a link here, tiny.cc/I-25 Broadway. We invite you to do that yourself and also to ask your own RNO if they would be willing to sign on to that. We have, I just got an update that we have about 700 signatures on that petition, and I have to brag that we haven't really tried that hard. And then we want to end with this motion, this proposed motion here. So as representatives of Lincoln Broadway Corridor RNO and West Wash Park Neighborhood Association, we ask the committee to consider this motion. Here's the motion. Should I read it, Joel, or should I? Wait,
yes, I would just
questions. Read it.
Go ahead and read
Should I
it
move?
out.
I can't.
Yeah.
I can't move. Can I?
You certainly can. Let me just give a little insight into the process here. INC committees cannot take positions, but we can recommend to the overall INC delegation to take positions. So we can wordsmith this a little bit later that, move that INC transportation recommend to the INC delegation, et cetera, et cetera. But once you get to the salient points, everybody has a chance to think about it.
Okay. The draft motion is that the Inc. Transportation Committee support our two organizations in our position to request that DOTI, CDOT, and Federal Highway Administration pause the project and update the design to align with the goals set forth in the environmental assessment for this project, specifically maintaining access to and from area neighborhoods, providing multimodal travel options, and fully integrated and useful bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And number 2, reconsider the rebuild of the I-25 northbound ramp that wraps around the 800 block of South Lincoln, so we don't displace these neighbors.
Thank you. And your co-presenter, I assume, is seconding this motion. Would you both accept just a friendly amendment to change the introductory text so that you move that the INC Transportation Committee recommend that INC support?
Yes, I would.
Okay. And Brittany, that's all right with you?
Brittany's in an airport.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's have a little discussion on this. I've seen a lot of chat in the chat box, a lot of support. Please raise hands if you've got any specific questions you want answered on this motion. And we'll use the raise hand feature in Zoom because I'm not looking at everybody's video screens for raising their actual hands. Okay, June.
So I've been living car-free in Denver for 5 years now. And the first time that I had to ride up Lincoln and Broadway was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had on a bike. When we're talking about useful bike infrastructure in this project, is that going to connect to proposals for, say, protected bike lanes south of I-25 on Broadway, or like protected bike lanes on Lincoln, or changing those to multi-use paths, or resurfacing sidewalks into multi-use trails? You know, has there been any thought around what do useful bike pathings mean? I hope you understand my question.
Yeah, I think I do. There is, Brittany, jump in if you disagree or you have anything to add, but I believe that there is a project area that maybe starts at one street south of Mississippi and goes to at least Exposition North. And so when the environmental assessment set forth goals to make sure that there's connected bike and ped facilities, I believe that they're talking about connecting into the station from paths that touch this area or from neighborhoods that touch this area. So for example, like money for this project it wouldn't be appropriate to use money for this project to design the Broadway bike lane north of Exposition.
Steve Harley has his hand up. Steve.
Hi, folks. I'm probably not the only one who gets a little bit jaded by petitions and wonders if they get much done. And I'm not saying this because I don't think your petition will get much done. I'm saying this to ask you how you think your petition will hit home, so that we have some idea of the force of this. I'm hoping that you're saying that it's going to be get more press and finally get the attention of those who aren't responding now, and maybe actually change things. But I just wonder, I assume you've thought about this and I'd like to hear it. And then I as a side note, I'd like to ask, have you considered a citizens initiative, which would have more of a direct controlling impact on something like this? But I'm not sure how a citizens initiative would be phrased so as to limit, maybe say the city of Denver cannot spend funds on this project until some future redesign is passed or something like that. Anyway, that's my question. Thank you.
I want to give Brittany a chance to answer some questions too. So Brittany, do you want to answer or do you want me to?
Yeah, so one thing we didn't mention in this presentation is in the petition, there is links to our letter, and within the links is an addendum that encompasses all of the feedback that we have done throughout the past couple of years. And those specific requests are what we want DOTI to listen to. And the petition right now you know, sometimes they think that, you know, this feedback and stuff in Arnold letters kind of come in a vacuum. And we want to really show that we've done the outreach. We're listening to the people, and that this is a solid way to show that this many people are opposed to it, not just a letter that, you know, we don't know exactly how many are involved in the letters and whatnot. So as I said, we have 700 people right now.
Yeah, it's at this point, it's really about political will, because the person who has the power to say, okay, let's reconsider this design is the executive director or the mayor. So a petition is a really powerful way to show what public support there is. And I think we've already shown that there's a broad public support, and we've done our due diligence. And to answer your question about the citizens initiative, I mean, just from a timing, that is something that's that we would consider going after, but timing wise, this project is, they almost have shovels in the ground. We're this close to construction. So I don't know that that's really an option. And it's come down to this final hour because we've really tried hard to work in good faith with the city of Denver, and it just didn't work out.
I love the feature on Zoom where you start talking on mute and then it tells you you're talking on mute. That's very smart. So I don't see any more hands up. Let me give just a little context on INC's process. INC is a coalition of neighborhood associations from across the city. INC only occasionally takes positions, but we do take positions. But to do so, it has to be brought to the entire citywide network of RNOs. They need to be educated. They need to hear both sides of an issue. So if this motion leaves this committee, it will go to INC, but it will probably take a few months to work through the process because neighborhoods all over the place want to be sure they're informed about things on any topic. Recently, the INC bylaws were tightened up with regard to raising the level of votes that it takes, so the quorum numbers as well as the percentage that's needed for position. So just to be clear, a motion here is a recommendation to INC. It's not yet a position of INC. And thank you. Both of our speakers actually knew that because we chatted earlier. So with no more discussion, I will call for a vote. The way we're going to vote is use the raise hand feature in Zoom. And this is the one that's, it's not the thumbs up, it's not the heart, it's the one that says raise hand. And we'll do that for two reasons. One, because they stay up, the other gestures go away after a while. And two, in the participants list, it sums up a total at the bottom. So if you are in favor of this motion, and anyone here can vote, this is not a membership-based committee, anyone who attends any INC committee can vote. If you're in favor of this motion, please use the raise hand button. And I will count down from 10, and then I'll announce the count.
I'd like to vote yes, but I can't since I'm a co-host.
Okay.
Also, this is Lucia Brown. Adrienne Brown is also here, but we only have one hand. So there's two hands coming from Lucia Brown.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have all the votes we're going to have. We have 34 hands raised, plus one for Amy and plus one for Adrienne, who's watching on a shared computer. And so now if you would lower your hands.
Would you lower my hand?
And all those opposed to the motion on the screen, please raise your hand.
Reactions?
Reactions.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's speaking, but okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands opposing the motion. If you were intending to and couldn't, could you just speak up briefly? Okay, we have none opposed. So I will write this up. If you could stop sharing your screen, I will write this up to send to the INC board to let them know that this committee is forwarding this motion. And then I'll be working with them on a process stuff as it moves forward to the INC delegation. All right, we are now on to the second half of our meeting. We have two topics remaining, and both are about new initiatives, fairly new things to get involved in, both of which I'm personally pretty excited about. The first topic we have tonight, I think we only have one presenter for this, Brad Johnson. I'll make you a co-host. Brad Johnson is a principal planner with Community Planning and Development, CPD, and they're partnering with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure on outdoor places. And if you would like to, Brad, you can unmute and share at will.
All right, appreciate it. Let me go through the motions here. And yes, it is between CPD and DOTI, but many other departments involved as well. Are you seeing this, Joel?
We are, but it's not the presenting view, it's the standard view.
And it's still like that right now?
It is. You may go to share screen now and see if you can, if you're in presenter view, you should be able to go to the share screen button and pick the other one. Tell Zoom to show the other window.
Let me try again. We have all this figured out already.
Hey, I was speaking on mute earlier, so I,
Maybe if I say, well, that's kind of weird because it's probably sharing you now. And now, is it showing the whole thing?
Absolutely perfect.
All right, cool. Thank you, guys. So Joel introduced, so I won't do that either, and I'll just jump right into it. So yes, this is a Denver Outdoor Places program presentation, and really what this is a program for outdoor patios in the city, and it builds off of the sort of lessons learned, both positive and negative, from what occurred during the pandemic. And so for background, you guys are well aware of this, but this all starts with the pandemic when restaurants and bars were forced to shut down for some periods of time, or at least limit indoor activities or limit capacity. And therefore there was a real burden on those members of our city. And in response to that crisis, frankly, the city responded by granting temporary regulatory relief for patios, both in the right-of-way space, so on sidewalks or in streets, but also on private property. And those that occurred on private property, the big regulatory relief element there was to allow them to put patios on surface parking lots, even if those parking spaces were required by zoning. We spent a lot of time early in the pandemic out in the field, really studying the different types of transformations of public space that occurred, and trying to understand what was successful, what wasn't, and we documented that in a study called the Public Realm Study that the city partnered with CU Denver planning students on. And overall, the reception to these elements in our right-of-way and throughout our city really were very well received overall. There certainly were some issues. I don't like to use pictures of bad examples in Denver in slideshows like this. So this is from San Diego, but here you see a sidewalk that is being blocked by a planter and a heating element, causing kind of a disruption in the flow along that important sidewalk space. There were other issues as well. There were design quality issues. Some of the patios were thrown up pretty hastily, and certainly that's understandable given the situation that was in front of us at that time. There were challenges with enforcement and safety for drivers, patios blocking views around intersections. There were some issues with neighborhood impacts of patios that were allowed to be closer to sensitive residential uses that may have otherwise been allowed without the relief of the regulations, and then for our customers, for restaurant businesses and such, the process to get reviewed was just really difficult. You have to work through a lot of hoops, even in this temporary program, to get approved. Nevertheless, there were, I think, a lot more positive response to this program than there were negative, both externally but also internally. And so you start to see a year and a half or so ago, different city departments getting together and thinking about what it would mean to develop a sort of permanent version of this temporary program. You also saw that happening around the country as well. We had stakeholders, residents, businesses, and others telling us how much they were desirous of a more permanent version of this program as well. And ultimately, Mayor Hancock did direct multiple city departments to work together to create a permanent patio program, with DOTI and CPD kind of being the lead agencies in developing that program. And so that led us to this Denver Outdoor Places program effort, which we're in the middle of now. We do have a website. So if you were to Google just Denver Outdoor Places program, I think you could get there really easily. I can put the link in the chat after I get through this presentation as well. And the scope as a whole, we want to really step back and think holistically about what outdoor patios, what the role of them is in our city, how they can positively benefit our city, make our streets better, add vibrancy to our city, help our businesses, and a number of other goals. We wanted to look at what other cities around the country are doing. We want to make sure that we address patios both on private property, but also in the right of way. We want to have outreach component, of course, as part of this effort. And we need to move fairly quickly to get this done, because we're under an emergency order right now that is ultimately going to run out for some of those patios that are out there under the temporary program. And so, like any good planners, the first thing we want to do is start categorizing stuff. And so we start to kind of look around the city, what kind of different patios do we need to address? And so bottom left, we have what we call above curb. And so that's a patio that's placed generally in the sidewalk area, more or less, within the right of way. And then we have below curb, and there's a couple of examples, or a couple of types within that category. And so we have on the bottom right, like what we call a below curb patio that's in on-street parking, like a parklet type of space, where the patio displaced a parallel parking space. We have below curb full street closures. So that's in the top left, and that's like a Larimer Square or a Glenarm Place, if you're familiar with those. And then we have, of course, private property patios that often happened in off-street parking lots, but also sometimes in other open areas of sites. So just wanted to share some pictures to help you visualize what those different typologies of patios were. So these are some examples of those above curb patios. Here are some of those patios that are described as below curb. So again, ones in parking spaces or full street closures. That's top right is Larimer Square. And then here's some examples of patios on private property. So that's that third typology. And so we are in the, like I said, we're in the middle of this process now. And so we are right now over the last, we're in the phase of kind of completing one of the elements of those three I just talked about, and that is the above curb typology. And so we front loaded that typology and have been working on it really throughout the fall up until this point. And the reason was that this one presented, I think, one of the biggest threats to mobility, especially for individuals who might use a wheelchair or are visually impaired, that really rely on our sidewalk space to get around the city. And so that was the reason for putting that one first in this process. We also have some experience with this, more so than that below curb typology I mentioned. So you guys have seen these kind of patios throughout the city, where you have a patio adjacent to often a building facade, and you see a metal railing around it like this, like it is as shown in these photos. These patios were permitted through what's called the tables, chairs, and railings program. That's what the kind of predecessor was even before COVID, which allowed these patios, like you see in these photos, to occur. But there were some issues, I think, when we look at that program and judge it against some of the good things that we saw during the pandemic. It isn't very flexible. Every patio is kind of the same, has to be next to the building, has to be enclosed by a fixed railing like this. There's no, in that program, there's no urban design oversight that's trying to push for a better design quality, durable materials, things like that. There is a bit of inconsistency in terms of who has oversight over patios within that tables, chairs, and railings program. DOTI is the reviewer, but sometimes somebody would come in to get a permit and they'd kind of have to go on a chase around different departments within the city to try to get approval beyond DOTI from DDPHE, the public health department, or CPD, if there was a land use issue to address, or other things like that. And so it's kind of a messy, confusing process. And so to start addressing above curb, we first kind of started working to just step back and think about what should our intent and objectives be here. And so I won't read through all of these, but I'll just hit on the high categories. And that is that as we think about above curb patios, we need to always prioritize accessibility and safety along the public way. The patio cannot preclude that kind of mobility. So that's number one. We want to emphasize urban design and placemaking as we go forward in addressing above curb patios in the Outdoor Places program. We want to support our businesses and provide more options to that would support them coming up with different ways to provide social gathering spaces for customers, but also kind of put a variety of potential elements out into the right of way that don't all look the same, and that can kind of create some variety in that space while also adding vibrancy to our streets. And then, of course, we always need to make sure that there's all kinds of demands on the right of way in addition to just mobility, and a lot of it you can't see because it's under the ground. But we need to make sure that patios are not conflicting with services, emergency services by the fire department or maintenance of utilities, whether those are above the ground or below ground, that any patios in these types of spaces are being considerate and sensitive to our street trees. We spent a lot of time looking at what other cities have been doing. These are some of the cities we looked at. We went through an exercise of kind of thinking about all the different types of patios, both locationally, where they might occur. So there's that classic building frontage location where we have always mandated patios like this go in the past before COVID. But we also have potential locations in the amenity zone separated from that property line and from the building. And those could be a hardscape location, or it could be kind of a softscape like a tree lawn location. We also thought through different degrees of delineation. So in the top left graphic, you see kind of a pre-COVID condition, right? Every patio was enclosed by a metal railing completely surrounding it and adjacent to the building. But there's a lot of other patios that are more of an open condition, either partially open, like something you see in the kind of middle column, or even completely open with no delineation at all, where patios are placed out in that sidewalk kind of streetscape space. Through that analysis, that led us to developing what we call a program requirements document. And right now, this document is just addressing above curb because we still need to work through those other typologies. And so there's just kind of a placeholder for below curb and private property. But ultimately, as we finish up the other elements, this document will be revised to incorporate these other typologies. But this is a very comprehensive document. It's meant to be very customer facing. And it is addressing numerous items, including design standards, management requirements for someone who would operate a patio in the public right-of-way for above curb, and establishing what the review process would be for somebody who wants to come in and get approved. And within that, one of the things that we're excited about is through that analysis I mentioned, we were able to get to a place to where we were comfortable opening up options for patios at both locations, building frontage and within that amenity zone, provided that we ensure that that pedestrian access route, which is shown in yellow in this cross section, remains open, remains clear, and is not disturbed by patios at either of these locations. We were able to get to a place of creating design standards that we felt were responsive to varying delineation types. So addressing the kind of pre-COVID condition of a fully enclosed, not fully enclosed, but fully delineated patio, and all these, as well as these other types of options that I mentioned as well. We have, this is just one example in this section on mobility and safety in this document that I'm talking about, that deals with the patio in terms of its relationship to other elements that are in the right of ways, clearances that need to be put in place to make sure that things are accessible and can be maintained, like a parking meter, for example, and also kind of micro level elements and design standards that deal with access to the patio, how the patio relates to entrances to a building, and other similar things like that. So that's just one example of many of the topics that are covered in that document. We did a kind of a tour around the city of outreach. These are some of the stops that we made. One of these was with the Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation INC ZAP committee, which I think is what has spurred the discussion around coming to this group tonight. And in terms of startup for above curb, we are going to launch this very soon. We've got the document drafted. We're all pretty much ready to go. We just kind of need to get some signatures on some documents internally and then open it up. And once we get it open here, and probably we're hoping in early February, we'll be able to release the rules. We will start opening transition, the transition for those people, those businesses that are permitted under the temporary program to start entering into this permanent program should they decide that they want to stay under these new regulations. I'm not sure if Jay Decker has joined this program, but he's kind of my counterpart on this project in DOTI. But another thing that we have went ahead and pushed forward is a street closure pilot program. And so we had about, I think we had about 5 full street closures where a whole block was closed. The ones that people know most are Larimer Square, Glenarm Place next to the pavilions, and then Upper Larimer from 29th to 30th, and I think also 27th to 28th, or part of that block was closed for a while. I think it's back open now, but 29th to 30th is still closed. So what we did with this was create a fairly flexible pilot program that would allow those blocks that are closed now to come in and apply with the city to come into a pilot program where they could potentially be allowed to stay out there beyond this temporary program. So the temporary program is going to expire soon, and this pilot program would allow the Larimer Squares of the world to potentially stay out there for another 5 years, monitor the performance of the space, conduct mobility studies, and potentially at the end of that pilot phase, make a case to the city that in fact these components of our street network should be converted in perpetuity to not allowing cars on them. And so we're excited about this program. Only Larimer Square has come into the program so far, but it's they're not approved or anything. They're just in the very early concept phase. But either way, we're excited to have them in there and start working towards this. And so as we go forward in the development of the other components of the program, we will turn our attention to that below curb typology I mentioned, as well as private property, which would include zoning amendments to make changes to how patios are regulated in the city now on private property. And that's the last slide. So happy to take any questions or entertain any discussion.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as you mentioned, Jay Decker hasn't shown up yet. He'll be our final presenter, so we have time for questions until he joins. One thing I just wanted to give context of, you've been working on this for a while, all the background work, all the peer city research and ideas, but the sort of the public engagement process has just begun. I think it was just last week that the first stakeholder working group was held, right?
That's the first stakeholder working group. That's true. Although I did show that slide, it was a little less formalized, but we did some targeted stakeholder outreach. Denver Streets Partnership was one of the groups that we spoke to in the development of the above curb elements of the program. So we've been doing it, but it hasn't been quite as robust and formalized, and it hasn't included that stakeholder working group, like you said, until last week. Was it only last week? That's
It was
hard to
only
believe.
last week.
I think you're right.
Okay, Nathan Harvey had a couple points. Nathan?
Yeah, so in terms of for the topologies that are on the curb, one of the most kind of uncomfortable experiences I think with those is when you are next to a busy road where cars are kind of zooming by. Are there any guidelines in those documents for how to separate that space and kind of make people not just feel more comfortable, but also more safe?
Yeah, to separate the patio space from the curb, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yes, that's yes, we do cover it, and we cover it in a kind of nuanced way. So no matter what, you got to be 3 feet off the curb. And then if you're one of those patio conditions that's more open, meaning there's no physical barrier between the patio and that curb, you got to add another foot to that. And the reason for that is that one of the concerns about those, I really like those fully open conditions, but there are some more potential impacts, right? If they're fully open like that, there's a tendency potentially for things to kind of move out of the space they're supposed to be in, right? And so that's why we kind of add that extra buffer on there.
Thank you. I do have one more comment on kind of the in-road ones that I know you haven't done the documents for those yet, but when that and in particular shared streets has been brought up and kind of anything related to parking, businesses often say, you know, oh, that will cost us money. And I think a lot of people know that the evidence kind of shows that that's not true, that actually usually freeing up parking spaces increases the revenue when you can put an outdoor patio. Do you have a plan for how you're going to approach the businesses in kind of an economic sense?
Yeah, and I think there's another element to that too. It's like what happens. There are some people that will be concerned about what happens to the money that was going in the parking meter that won't be going in there anymore. So I know you're speaking to the concern of a business owner, but just throwing that out there. So we really haven't started the below curb part in any significant way yet. We have an economic consultant, so we have a consultant on the team with us, and a part of that consultant team includes an economic consultant that's worked around the Front Range for a very long time, and she's going to be doing some analysis about the economic impacts of patios. We've seen similar analysis in New York and Toronto, I think a couple other places that were fairly compelling. So we're going to do a Denver version of that. So I think that will help with some of that. But yeah, we know that discussion's coming, and I think part of it is money loss, and part of it is just, you know, not a new thing, but people complaining about parking going away, even if it's in lieu of a patio space that, you know, I think a lot of people would argue is more additive to the street life, right?
Okay, we had a question or a recommendation from Jerry, Jerry Orton. Jerry?
Hey, hi. Yeah, so my battery just about ran out, so I got to mobilize. Yeah, so there's a couple fenced areas in lower downtown, one at the 17th Street Gardens, which is right in front of Whole Foods. A fenced area in front of Cafe Landscape and Sweet Greens, which is part of the Wewater Pavilion. And then a fenced area down by the light rail station, which I think is the Chestnut Pavilion. Stand areas seem to be great opportunities for better use of outdoor space. And I wonder if those could be addressed in your in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not specifically familiar with those spaces, so I'm having a hard time maybe visualizing what you're describing to be able to answer you there.
Okay, so these are areas where there used to be granite benches, and the benches were taken out as a part of addressing some of the congregation of drug users, drug sales, and just hanging out. And so now they're kind of just fenced off areas, much like Civic Center Park was for a while. And I don't know what the proposals are for them, because these three different areas really kind of fall into three different governmental entities. I think it's Denver Union Station Metro District for Wewater Pavilion. I believe it's the Central Platte Valley Metro District for the 17th Street Gardens in front of Whole Foods. And I think it might be RTD for the Chestnut Pavilion.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It sounds like it's temporary fencing maybe that you're speaking to. Well, this would be an applicant-driven program, so it's not about the city going out and pushing for patios to be in this place or that place, right? So applicants, let's say there's a business adjacent to one of those locations that you're talking about, and hopefully that temporary fencing, whatever it's needed there for, that purpose goes away and that space opens back up, then that could be a space where that business owner could come to apply to the city to install a patio there. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Last one, and then Jay Decker's joined us, so we'll switch topics here. We had a question from Steve about minimum par width. Steve, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, thanks. What is the minimum space that your design guidelines will require for pedestrians to move through the sidewalk? And the reason I ask that is because I live near Broadway, and Broadway is a complicated streetscape because it's fairly narrow, and there already are a lot of patios, and there are a lot of informal use of the sidewalk that narrows the streetscape even further. And so one of our concerns is that once you establish this minimum space, the other thing that happens is that, as you mentioned, informal stuff happens, or creep happens. So what kind of enforcement regime does your report project, or is there any concern for that? Are you not looking at that end of it?
Now we'll look at enforcement. So DOTI will be the enforcement arm under the program. Now focusing for the moment, per your question, on patios that are occurring in the right of way. So later when we get to private property, CPD and other agencies get involved in enforcement, right? But DOTI will be in the enforcement arm if those kind of blocks, if those pedestrian access routes were being blocked. I mean, that's something that could be complained about by a 311 that will get then routed to DOTI, and we can send our enforcement team out there from DOTI to make a correction there. To your question about addressing it, yeah, the PAR, that pedestrian access route is like, it's sacred, it's the key element in the above curb space above all else.
And how wide should it be?
Yeah, so I want to start by saying what it was before. So the existing program, the minimum par is 5 foot wide. We through this program have expanded that to be a minimum of 6. And that's from looking around the country and kind of seeing what other cities have done. And we feel like a lot of them are staying at 5, but some of the more progressive cities we've seen move to 6. And so we've tried to follow suit on that because accessibility, especially for persons with disabilities, has been a huge focus of our effort. And so that's a way for us to be responsive to what we've heard around that. We do build in a little bit of flexibility because sometimes you might have an existing sidewalk that's already paved that's 5 feet, you know? And so I think we don't want to be, we want to give ourselves a little bit of flexibility to where we're not saying that the sidewalk now has to be like, we have to add more pavement out there. So we have a little bit of flexibility in there, but the starting point is 6 feet now under this new program.
Thanks. We need to move to our last topic just to give enough time for it. Brad, thank you so much. I would encourage you to stay on and read through some of the chat that came in. There's some really great ideas looking at other cities outside of the United States. Some pointed comments about if the sidewalk's sacred, why does DOTI place poles right in the middle of it? Some good stuff in there. So as project manager, I think you'll be interested in that. But I really appreciate this and the outreach that you've done to a very diverse group of folks for the stakeholder working group, and look forward to following this through.
Okay, appreciate it, guys.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to our last speaker, Jay Decker. Jay is co-project manager with the last program, but he's also the project manager for Shared Streets. And Jay's been here before telling us about what was then an upcoming effort for Shared Streets, again, learning from what we did in the pandemic and trying to take forward what we want to do in the future. Jay, I've made you co-host. If you are in a position to share your screen, you can. Otherwise, let me know and I'll do it for you.
Great. Thanks, Joel. And sorry for the hat and the haggard voice. I literally just touched down a DIA like 20 minutes ago. And so I'm glad we're able to make it in time to make this work. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and work through this PowerPoint. Thanks everyone for attending here. I think these might be swapped actually. There we go. That should be better. Everyone seeing the main screen now?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, thanks for everyone for being interested in learning a little bit more about this. As Joel said, we've been here before, but we've made significant progress the last couple months, and so wanted to come back to the group and update folks on kind of where we've been and where we're headed. I'll just kind of quickly recap kind of some of the stuff we've done, and then some of the most recent progress we've made, and where we're looking for community feedback for our second round here, and how you all can support us in this effort. But just kind of to get our mindset here, temporary shared streets, for those that weren't here for the previous presentation we gave, is something that the city did during the pandemic. It was meant to reclaim some street space for active recreation and just kind of helping spread out during social distancing and all of that. Originally was meant to be around for 30 days. We were all naive back then, and ended up being around for several years because it was such a big success and really showed that Denverites really do want more comfortable and safe spaces to recreate and just be a part of their community, and not necessarily have so much space be devoted to just cars. One of the great things that we did during the Shared Streets temporary version is we actually collected a lot of data, and what we saw is that it really hit the nail on the head on ultimately what we were trying to do, which was deter cars. So make sure that we diverted vehicles onto other streets. Now, that's not to say there weren't cars on them. There are shared streets, which means they're shared to all modes, cars, bikes, peds, and any other form of wheeled travel. But we wanted to make sure that there were far less vehicles, and the vehicles that were on the road were going much slower. So it was a safe and comfortable environment to intermix with people walking and rolling. Which leads us to creating the permanent program after it being such a big success. The mayor and DOTI wanted to go ahead and roll that into trying to figure out how to make this permanent. It's not really done anywhere to a large or even a medium degree in the US, but we knew we had something that was important here to our community. So we're trying to figure out what it could look like in the future for Denver. And what we've been able to establish as our program vision is that we want this program to first prioritize people through the creation of comfortable spaces to move, interact, and play within the right-of-way. And then it's important to say that, for these to be successful, they really do need to be maintained and be done in a sustainable way as well, because they are quite expensive to do. So we do need a lot of partners, and we need to make sure that we pick the correct locations to do them. What we've settled on as far as the two different typologies of shared streets we're looking at are what we're calling community and commercial. Commercial should be fairly obvious. You may have even been on a shared street in another city in a commercial context. There's a few around the nation, but those are going to be where it's primarily commercial. Those are going to be the businesses or the business improvement district that's going to help the city maintain them, potentially also offering support on helping us build it and finance it as well. And it's largely meant for maybe kind of what you would feel like a Larimer Square right now, just a nicer permanent version where you can kind of go between across the street to kind of meander and shop and see things without the fear of having to go to a crosswalk or worried about stepping off the sidewalk and being hit by a car. And then the other side of this, and frankly, this isn't done anywhere in the US, so we are completely innovating on this. So forgive me, it's not a perfect photo, but one that we'll be able to refine here in Denver as what we're calling a community street. And so that really is just a way to say a residential street. And so these are areas that may be a little bit more similar to the temporary shared street locations that we went in that were primarily residentially focused. And the idea behind those are they're not necessarily a destination in of themselves. People aren't going to come from out of town to go to one of these streets per se, but they're going to be gathering places for the community. They'll be on important bike and pedestrian and adjacent to transit routes as part of our larger multimodal network. And they'll just create a safer environment, have more greenery associated with them, and just be kind of a sense of place from a community standpoint. And then I think it's important to note here that, while everyone in the city would kind of love to snap our fingers and have shared streets all over the city, they're very expensive to do so because of ADA regulations and different material types and things like that you can see. Really what we're looking to accomplish here is to have a shared street that's probably between 1 and 3 blocks that act as a key node along a larger multimodal network. So like 16th Street, for example, during the temporary pandemic, that was about 1 mile long. Something like that probably won't exist in a permanent fashion, at least in the short and medium term. But we're hoping that maybe a key section of that street, for example, could be a part of that with really great biking and walking access on kind of multiple ends of that to kind of get you there as well. As far as the project schedule goes, we started in earnest last year in July, and we've been doing quite a lot of things related to building location analysis. And so where could a shared street technically exist from an engineering standpoint? We can't put them on, Colfax and Broadway and things like that. And, there's conflicts with bus lanes or bus routes, and what do we do around schools and all of that. So just figuring out ultimately where they could go. And then during that time period, we've also been working on, how should they ultimately look? The version we had temporarily during the pandemic is not at all what we would do in a permanent fashion. Those are about as temporary as they get, using construction materials, and they don't look good. They worked well enough during a really unique period of time, but they won't work well over a sustained period, and they just kind of cause a lot of maintenance issues and things like that. So hopefully looking more like a permanent infrastructure, like in some of the previous photos, and it's just trying to figure out what ultimately that looks like. And then developing the program itself. This is brand new at the city. So who works on it? Where does the funding come from? You know, what are our goals? What's the vision of this? You know, how much can we budget per year to kind of get some of this stuff done? And then the implementation plan. So kind of what's our roadmap the next 6 years, based on kind of political and budget wise, and then also what could just kind of be assumed. How many people do we need to hire, stuff like that, to get some of this stuff done. And then you can kind of see the schedule of various community leadership and kind of stakeholder meetings that we've been plugging in along the way to get key feedback from key folks. We had our first public meeting at the end of October. It was really successful. I think probably many of you were on that. And you know, we had a lot of attendees and a lot of questions, and you know, the main takeaway was that people were just really excited for this. They see a huge need in Denver for safer, more comfortable pedestrianized streets. It's something that maybe some of us have experienced in a small scale here, and then also maybe some other cities, but are a little bit more common in, say, like Europe, for example. And so it's a concept that's kind of been around a while, and so people clearly are gravitating towards it for something in Denver. We're now starting survey number 2 for our community engagement to get more feedback on the location analysis. We were able to get really good feedback on what they'd like to see from kind of a design perspective. And so now we're getting a little bit closer into narrowing in on kind of where they could go. So we'll of course have the email, social pop-up, you know, articles, things like that. And then for previous ones, we were able to get, you know, quite a lot of responses. For example, I think a good comparison is like Denver Moves Everyone, which some folks may have participated in. That was a citywide thing for multiple years, and it's really the transportation plan that the city does every 10 years. We got about as much feedback as they did. So clearly people are really gravitating towards shared streets specifically. Some of the things that we learned from that group and kind of what they thought around design elements is that, you know, overall, you know, the community really wants places that they can both socialize and hang out and have conversations with, but then for us to act as thoroughfares for safe travel through. So that's kind of a tough nut to crack, you know, having a place where people can kind of interact with their community and socialize and play and stay, but also maintain the ability for bicyclists and walkers and things like that to go through. And so thankfully, you know, we have fairly wide streets in Denver, so I think we can accomplish that. But it's going to be a unique process related to the design to kind of figure out how that would look. And then some of the other takeaways we got were that trees and vegetation were really highly requested as elements that make people feel comfortable and safe, and then also are just things that people want to be around. So they want to, you know, have those elements in a shared street. If they're going to spend time in a shared street, they don't necessarily want it to feel like, you know, a 2-lane highway, you know, by a strip mall, right? We want to make sure there's greenery there and the appropriate design infrastructure that is inviting and just is comfortable for people to hang out in. And then finally, pretty obvious one, safety, you know, a huge theme here. For these to be successful, we really need to be more aggressive than we ever have been in the city of Denver at reducing both the number of cars on these streets, and then also for the cars that are allowed on the street, so people that live there and deliveries, things like that, that they are forced to go at such a low speed that it really prioritizes people walking and biking, and it's comfortable for people to be hanging out in the street. You can kind of think of maybe like the level of traffic in like a cul-de-sac or something like that, for example. We are just now starting another round of community engagement. This is what I was talking about for actually getting some preferences for locations. And so it is live, I think today actually, and it's going to be open for a little over a month. So we're hoping to get some really good feedback. I'm going to have a link at the end of here that you may be able to click on. If not, it's a short link that you could type in, and then hopefully you can share it out to your networks, and starting to get some really good feedback on what we've looked at as far as streets we think could work. Did we miss any? Which of the ones that we looked at are good, which are bad? Some things like that, so we can start to get some direct feedback. As far as the design guidelines are concerned, and so these play a really important role with our connection to that locational analysis, which we're going to get into. And it's a lot of engineering, kind of technical jargon related to street classifications. Are they slow, comfortable, local streets, maybe in front of people's houses, versus arterial streets, which are really meant to take a lot of bus and vehicle traffic? What happens when they cross over those? What do you do about ADA accessibility? When things do have to cross busier streets, making sure they're signalized and safe, and a lot of things like that. And we're starting to think about, in addition to elements to make it very safe and divert vehicles, also things like gateways. So making sure that people are very aware you are in a different space. This is a shared street. It's not something that really exists in Denver, and so we need to alert folks and both deter drivers, but then also welcome other modes of travel in the community to these spaces. And then also, the city, frankly, we're really good at building things. We're not as good as we could be at maintaining them longer term. So figuring out, who are our partners, and picking materials that, maybe they're more expensive, maybe they take a longer time to initially put in, but they're going to stay nicer for longer. And then as far as the mapping locational analysis, we've really done it in two parts. And so the step one is really just to figure out what the candidate streets are. So looking at every single street in Denver, which ones theoretically could have a shared street on them. It doesn't mean we would do all of them. That's like basically like 9/10 of the streets in Denver. You'll see it in a minute. But really, it's kind of almost excluding the ones that we know can't work. And then the second part of the locational analysis is actually prioritizing those candidate streets. And so here's kind of the universe of what could exist. And then ultimately, we need to figure out what are the top priorities for the city to start working on, and then having conversations with the community and figuring out how those can get done, first through, however many number we can get done in that first 6 years. And the prioritization criteria, it's very thorough. And so a big part of it is kind of that public stakeholder input that we're going to get through the next month. But it's also related to things like, land use, residential versus commercial, origin and destination. Where are people starting their trips? Where are they ending them? Are you by rec centers? Are you by parks? What are the characteristics of the streets? Of course, equity, things like that. So it really tries to narrow in and find those top streets we should work on first. And so this locational analysis and also the prioritization is broken across community and commercial streets, because the candidate streets for those are a little bit different. The main thing being community streets are going to be in residential areas, and commercial streets are going to be in commercial areas, and there's just far fewer commercial areas. And so you'll see that reflected in the maps here. But some important things, just showing areas where we deselected streets are really going to be those streets where maybe they're on an RTD bus route. We don't want to slow buses down, increase conflicts, things like that. There's a lot of other streets to choose that aren't on bus routes. Making sure that we aren't, adjacent to any industrial airport kind of land uses where maybe it is a quiet street, but there's no one around, like no one's actually going to use it. So that really should that be prioritized versus, in front of a lot of people's houses that maybe really want it, for example. And then for commercial streets, they're the slower to medium kind of slow streets. Again, not on any bus routes, not on any of those industrial type land uses. And then making sure that they are really truly commercial, and they aren't necessarily where there's a lot of density, but maybe a lot of that density is actually more related to condos and apartments and things like that. So it's not truly commercial. And then also one of the factors for our prioritization is what's been in our previous plans. What are the conversations we've already had with the community at length about where some of these should exist. And it might be surprising to you, since it's a relatively new idea in Denver, that similar type things have been recommended in plans going back a number of years. We want to make sure we pull those out and make sure that those are shown and weighted in the prioritization as well, since they've done their homework, so to speak.
Jay, I hate to interrupt. We've got about 3 minutes left. And so up to you what the key points are you want to hit, and if we could leave any time for questions.
Perfect. Well, I'm on the last slide, so good time there. And so last thing is just program development. Just so many things we have to do, like we talked about: staffing plan, risk assessments, how do we fund it, how do we evaluate, how do we get better maintenance, branding, things like that. So I won't belabor the point, but last slide, please, let us know if you have any questions. And then this is also the live link that you will be able to go to start to see that and play around with those candidate streets and start voicing your opinion, and hopefully you share that with your networks.
Great. Let's see if we can get to a couple questions. John Ricky, you wanted to ask a question about what results to expect.
Yes, you talked a lot about safety, but we've been seeing in the bicycle community DOTI watering down projects very recently. I just heard last night about a bicycle facility that was completely removed from the West Area Plan. So how can we trust you that you're going to actually do what needs to be done to make these things effective?
I can tell you, if we commit to building something, we will. Something that's in a plan versus something that we've had multiple conversations with the community with and done designs for are very different. We think very aggressively with planning. We often think 10, 20 years out. And so sometimes communities change, they change their opinions. I don't know what happened on that one, whether it was a political issue or maybe the community just changed their mind. But that's very common during the planning process. And so that's why we're trying to gather your feedback here and then identify those top candidate streets where if the community does want them during the conversations we have after this part, developing the program, that those are the ones we will move forward with and
So then why are we having so much planning if they don't actually accomplish anything?
Well, planning is very important to get a lot of diverse voices to the table, but it's never perfect. We're not going to get everyone on a Zoom call. We're not going to get everyone on a community meeting. People have different schedules. Not everyone's able to come into an INC meeting and spend a couple hours to learn about this stuff. And so there are different voices that pop up at different points during the process, and we have to respect those.
So we get to vote on whether we're safe.
Yeah, John, we're going to move to the next one, but Jay, I think you're aware there's a lot of energy out there, especially on neighborhood bikeways. Things that were discussed about being protected and then end up being pretty minimal. Separate topic from your presentation, but there's a lot of energy about that. Steve Harley has a specific question about a proposed area. Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the Baker RNO BHNA submitted a request for shared streets and specific streets in our neighborhood in February 2021. Should we resubmit that? The reason I ask is it's actually kind of a fair amount of work. I don't have the authority to do it, so I have to go to my board, and my board is not fast acting. So I just want to see if I should go through that effort, or if you still have that kind of in your file.
I have not seen that, so I'm not sure who you communicated to, but they did not give that to us. So I'd love to see what ultimately got recommended and voted and approved, because if it is in a formal planning document, That'll be added to the list of all the others that you saw there and actually would be elevated for prioritization, assuming you did proper community outreach and had those conversations, and the entirety, not the entirety, majority of the community does want those. So that's
okay.
very important.
Just to be clear, it's not in a neighborhood plan. It was a request from our neighborhood organization while the Shared Streets program was in its nascence, and so it's a letter we sent to DOTI. So I'll try to get it moved along. Then it's worth the effort. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and then I would also suggest that you highlight those specific streets on this mapping exercise too, so it's you're doubly showing on there.
Okay, we'll end with a question from Jane about the costs of shared streets. Jane.
Oh, that might be
June.
me.
June, I'm sorry.
Sorry, my name is, that people get it wrong pretty often. So Jay, you mentioned shared streets as being expensive. I wanted to delve a bit into that because from my knowledge, like maintenance costs should be pretty low for them because cars aren't on them for the most part. So when you mean expensive, do you mean like resurfacing? Do you need new materials? I know you mentioned ADA access. What does that entail? You know, are we talking installing new concrete curbs or diverters or roundabouts? You know, what sort of infrastructure are we talking about?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I wish we had like 20 more minutes to really get into it. But I'm glad we're on this photo. This is actually Denver's first and only shared street. This is one block as a part of the 39th Avenue Greenway. You can see here why this is so much different than a typical street in Denver. Number one, the curbs have been removed. Number two, it's not pavement or asphalt, it's specific type of brick and things like that. You add in green infrastructure, planters, landscaping, and then it maybe is hard to see on here, but for most roads in Denver, they have kind of a slight curve on them that are called the crown. And really, it depends when they were last paved and what area of the city you live in. But really, it's because you don't really want a flat street because then the water doesn't have anywhere to go. But that is bad for ADA accessibility. We have to have things rather flat for people to appropriately, with all abilities, be able to participate on them. And so you might be able to just see a street in your neighborhood that has a crown on it. We'd have to completely redo the road, take out the curbs, repave everything, put in green infrastructure, plant trees. Maybe we have to add lighting so it's lit at night. We're putting in, you know, it's not a level of asphalt. Maybe it's some nice bricks and things like that. Maybe we're able to put some public art. You can see how things like that would add up very quickly. And, you know, for example, some folks were talking about watered down bikeway promises. Some of that does come from just cost related where, you know, I think the city would love to put protected bike lanes everywhere with big, you know, concrete blocks. But, you know, based on the money we have, a lot of times we can only afford like the paint and posts, for example, and that type of stuff is not going to cut it for a shared street. And so we just need to figure out ultimately, you know, what is the level of design based on what we can get done that also meets the safety needs as well. So it's kind of a tricky one to crack there. And I'm hoping residents have a lot of support for this and they do vote for added funding to get more of these done in the city.
Thank you, Jay. I would encourage everyone to follow up on this link and share it widely. They're getting multiple rounds of input, and now they're into wanting to see specific locations that we think the two different types, and maybe as we work through this, there'll be more subtypes and more inspirational images, but where you think it might go, and participate in the conversation that way. Jay, thank you for coming here. You've been a repeat guest, and there's a reason for that. Really appreciate it, and thanks for rushing back from your trip to be with us tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And yeah, please participate in that link and share it far and wide. The more feedback we get, the better our results will be.
Thanks so much. We'll be meeting again in 2 months. We meet every other month on the second Thursday of the month from 6 to 8 p.m. And we're already starting to get agenda items for the next meeting, including an update on Denver Moves Everyone. Have a great night, and we will be posting this to the INC YouTube page if you want to share the meeting to anyone who couldn't attend. Thanks a lot.